Welcome to the Grizzled Geologist Podcast. I'm your host, Keith Carden, and I'm back. And I've brought my friend Phil Pahl, who I just met last week, on to talk about a really interesting subject. We're going to get into the West Edmond Hunton Lime Unit and kind of the history behind it. But before we get started, make sure that you like and subscribe to my channel. Visit the www.thegrizzledgeologist.com if you'd like to come on the show. Hit the like, hit the subscribe. Big stuff is happening. Sorry, I've been a little bit slow on the new long format podcast, but I've had a lot going on. I started the new job. That's kind of how I met Phil. Been really busy with some personal life stuff, finding a place in the woodlands, et cetera, et cetera. But I'm back. I've got some podcasts lined up. Make sure that you reach out if you'd like to come on. But in the meantime, Phil Pahl, he and I met each other last week related to work. He has a company, Landlocked GIS, and we're kind of, working on some stuff during this transaction that we're in. But while we were in this, conference room meeting, he was kind of showcasing his skills and some of the things that he's done. And up popped something that was really familiar to me. It was like, the great Gutowski. And I'm going to let him get a little bit into it, but it has to do with the history of the West Edmond Hunton Lime Unit, which is a place that's near and dear to my heart. Revolution Resources, the company I work for, operated this unit and drilled a whole bunch of wells in it, and had a really great time and a lot of success. So now I'm just going to hand it over here to Phil and let him introduce himself, and let's get into this subject.
Awesome. Keith, thanks for having me on, man. This is going to be fun. So I'm Phil Pahl, as he said, and I own a company called Landlocked GIS, which stands for Geographic Information Systems, for those who don't know. On the low end, I make paper maps for people and manage their geospatial data. On the high end, I build somewhat of an internalized Google Map system for different oil companies and related companies. It's a great job. I'm also the president of the Orphan Well Cooperative, which is a nonprofit that is trying to raise awareness of the orphan wells in Oklahoma and across the country. We have created the first national orphan well data set that we have sampled against other different cultural and environmental data points. And that's available online for free for anyone to use.
Awesome. We just touched on a technical topic in oil and gas. Why don't you talk to me a little bit more about what you just told us? What is an orphan well? What exactly is that?
So an orphan well is where, say, a mom and pop company had a couple of wells, they go bankrupt, they get relinquished to the state, just like an orphaned child. So the state is now in charge of that orphan well, and the state has a lot of things going on. They don't always, they're not able to measure to see if these wells are leaking, if they're plugged properly. They're not able to plug it in any capacity, although they are doing that now. We do have some plugging jobs going on by the state, so that's fantastic.
Yeah.
But what we have created in the web map on the Orphan Well Cooperative website, that's orphanwell.org.
Mm-hmm.
There's a web map on there, and you can, and we try to get, state agencies and anyone, tribes, anyone who's been given federal dollars to plug orphan wells. We want to give them a resource to prioritize their plugging. So we've mapped all the wells we could. We, compared them to the data points, and we've given them rankings based on a national, state, and tribal level. So yeah, just something else I'm in the middle of as well. So, and then this documentary project we're here to talk about.
Okay, yeah. So this is a documentary that you're working on. And again, it has to do with the West Edmond Hunton Lime Unit and the people that discovered it. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So the West Edmond oil field was discovered by a man named Ace Gutowski. They called him Ace for short. And through mutual friends over, I guess it was probably 8 years ago, I ran into the granddaughter of this man. And at the time, she only knew about her grandfather for about 3 years. She'd had no idea who he was, no idea what he did, no idea the impact that it made on Edmond and then the whole world because of this discovery, right? And, started out small. I wanted to help her a little bit because she just wasn't getting far. She needed a little bit of help. So I was able to help her by building her a website, and then, thought I needed to maybe map something for this because that's what I do. I should probably map it. So I was just looking for maybe a unit boundary or something really basic. But what I found after going through the Oklahoma Corporation Commission website was a 1945 field report on this field. Yes. So it's like 300 something pages. There's tons of data, tons of maps.
Was it Robert S. Kerr that actually wrote that report?
I do not know the answer to that. I could look it up.
Kerr McGee Oil Company. I actually think that it was Robert S. Kerr that wrote the report. that
That's
you're referring
amazing.
to. And that's actually another big deal and connections with Oklahoma oil history. I want to
That's
make sure I'm
incredible.
going to check into that, but there's a really good chance that that is. I remember seeing that and thinking, oh my God,
Yeah,
like that's a big
that's
deal.
groundbreaking. Yeah.
Yep. Yep. So, and some of those early maps, I'm pretty sure we're going to see a connection to him on some of the early reporting. But go ahead. Go ahead.
Absolutely. So where were we? So I started using that. I was able to pull the data, the tabular data out of this report, and then tied it to well spots on the map. And then on the Greg Gutowski website, that's thegreggutowski.com.
Got it.
There is a West Edmond oil field story map link at the top. And that shows kind of the growth of the field and how fast it grew. There's a time aware animation on there that's really interesting to watch and just shows you kind of once the first well was producing, how fast everything else started popping up in that area. And it's just insane to think about that happening in today's world. Not just the scale, but I mean, how much they were pumping out and everything that it was going to,
Yep.
it was fueling the whole world at that point.
Yep. Yep. And it's kind of interesting. And just for those of us here in Oklahoma City, this discovery well is just north of the turnpike, kind of between Council and Rockwell, if I'm not mistaken, because we actually offset that location with some of the horizontal wells that we drilled. And again, historically, I was always loved it when I'd see kind of the first discovery well in the area. And, we're bringing it up right next to it to kind of continue the legacy of this field. So,
Right.
you'd mentioned that this is a kind of a World War II discovery. I kind of want you to get into a little bit of the history there about how it was discovered. And then I think we have a little bit to talk about after that. Just, I've been watching a lot of World War II documentaries recently, and the Germans were actually absolutely, when they realized they had lost, it was just the amount of petroleum reserves and things that we have. And it really boils down to units like the West Edmond Hunton Lime unit that were a game changer in world history, if you really want to put it that way. But why don't you get into Ace's story?
So Asif was a Ukrainian immigrant. He fled his homeland in the Ukraine. It was Zhytomyr, Ukraine.
Okay.
Fled when he was, I think he was around 9 or 10 years old. It could be a little bit younger. But anyway, he got across the ocean with a couple of brothers, ended up in Baltimore, got separated because he was sick and they were not. So
Okay.
they were quarantining people coming off the boats because it was just, hundreds of people packed onto a boat. Anyway, he worked his way through a couple of jobs. Eventually, he met this guy in a Chicago bar. And he was basically like, hey, I'm from Oklahoma. I got this daughter. You guys would be great together. And so he took him up, but he came to Oklahoma with him, met his daughter. They got married. 3 kids later, she ends up tragically dying. And then she, in his sorrow, he ends up going to a Kingfisher bar and he meets this woman named Marie J. And we call her the Black Widow because she was married 5 times before Ace and they all mysteriously died. So we don't know what exactly happened to them, but that's kind of the hearsay that we've gotten. There's nothing proving it. I can't say it is truth, but that's the story we're running with.
All right.
So they got married. He had discovered the oil field after a bunch of different attempts, but he had discovered it using a doodlebug.
Okay. What's a doodlebug?
So in the case of what we're going to talk about, it's a cylindrical metal device hanging from a chain that could have been filled with some sort of solution, chemicals, elements. I really don't know.
Okay, kind of an alchemical mix in there.
Right. And so there's one on display at the Oklahoma History Center in the oil and gas section. And they say it's the one that Gutowski actually used. There's a little piece of paper on there kind of describing him and how he used it. But it said that not everyone could wield a doodlebug or use it properly, but Ace Gutowski could. So
you say, hey, listen, how are we going to refute it at this point?
At this point, you got to say maybe. Yep. So yeah,
cool.
So he found the spot, and found it with the doodlebug and then started drilling. And it took, I think, 4 months to drill that first Wagner 1 well.
Yep.
And then it gushed like crazy. They hit a really high pocket.
Yep.
So yeah, that's the first one that came in. And after that, all of the producers and geologists and everyone who didn't believe there was oil there started rushing in like crazy.
Yeah, they certainly did.
The growth was explosive. Like nothing we've seen today.
And I was going to say, back 1942, this reservoir is at like 7,500 feet measured depth. So that's not shallow. So that 4-month time period makes sense, for the technology that they had during the time. But you are right. that the field development after that, just in terms of the time scale, the entire unit, which is, it's not small. I think it's 30 plus thousand acres for sure. And, it was completely developed vertically by the end of the war. And so that's 3 years. And if I'm not mistaken, there were 745 wells drilled in that unit originally. And the last part is when they went all the way down south and it kind of tapered down into a little bit narrow area. And because the trap that we're here, so I'm going to get a little geologic for you, but there's a very special trap that we have here. Porosity development in this unit in the first place. And through my work, and actually where I grew up in El Paso, Texas, I actually had a similar member, just like Welu, kind of exposed in the mountains around where I grew up. And when I was in structural geology, we actually went out here, and that's how I kind of really learned to understand this unit, because what I'd learned in El Paso is that I was actually looking at a giant cave system. And there's this kind of weird sand inside of it. And the instructor was like, well, what you're actually looking at is an ancient cave that had been filled back in with sediment and filled up all the holes. Yep.
That's incredible.
Yep. And so the West Edmond, as I'm working through this and looking at the different areas and how it was developed and how the rocks look and where the porosity is, I kind of had this epiphany that, okay, here we go. This is basically an ancient karst system. And with that, I don't know, I'd kind of like to do a paper one day, but kind of have a really good idea of an ancient kind of Carlsbad Caverns, that system that is what the West Edmond Hunton Lime unit is now. So anyhow, they'd kind of found this trap where you've got the rocks kind of coming up and thinning out up against a giant fault. And so, yep, by the end of 1945, and who are the main companies that were there? We had Ohio. Who else?
We had Magnolia, we had Phillips, we had, there's a handful of others, but they all ended up kind of going into Standard Oil at one point. Like they all kind of formed into that over time. But yeah, a lot of them were small. There were a couple big ones. Started to produce there too, but yeah, over time, all came under the same umbrella.
And so just from my experience, all I can say is I have a special place in my heart for this. It's just the rock is one of the best reservoirs in the continental United States. No holds bar, absolutely beautiful. It would be even better today, but when they first produced it, natural gas was a byproduct that nobody kept or used back then. So what they did is a technique called blowing down the gas cap. You have gas, oil, and water is generally the stratification of the fluids in the reservoir. And so to get to that sweet crude, and this is a certain special kind of crude, actually. This is the really good Oklahoma oil. Hold on, I have a little bit here.
Lovely. Look at that.
That well was drilled not too far from the Wagner, actually.
Wow, no kidding.
Yep.
Does it have a name on there?
Yeah, this is the Braun 1404 32-091BH, and that was for the Bodark. That's the member within the Hunton that we drilled.
Okay.
And this is the actual crude, which is a very light green Oklahoma crude. High gravity, like 42 API. So like the higher that number is, the closer you're getting into gas and some more, different lengths of molecules. And this is just the primo. The darker oil, like the thicker oil, would have a lower number, like in the 35, 36. That would be black oil. But this is not that. I don't know if you can tell, but this is just beautiful green Oklahoma crude from the West Edmond Hunton Lime unit.
Incredible.
Yep. Nope. That was a particularly special well. We mowed that one down really quick. But
nice.
Anyway, so like you can see, I love this thing. I love your project, and so let's kind of talk a little bit about that. You say you had mentioned that you had met the granddaughter, and you're kind of helping her get stuff put together, and you've kind of turned it into kind of a big project that you've been working on. And so why don't you talk to me a little bit about that?
So when it started off, we wanted this to be a movie, like a full feature film, we think it has all the elements to make a good story for that type of production. And then we decided we wanted to maybe make it a series because, again, there's a lot we could go on. We could do all kinds of wildcatting stories, and do a whole series based on that. And at this point now, we are at a documentary phase where we think if we can create a documentary and showcase a lot of these elements of the story, that hopefully we can get someone picking it up for an actual series, and maybe we can build on it from there.
Got it.
So yeah, that's the plan as of right now. But we've got a great team put together. A
Okay.
lot of people. We got a historian from OSU. We've got a documentarian from OETA. We've got other people who want to direct it. We've got writers. We've got people who want to work on this project because this story is just so engrossing. Like you want to jump right in because there's so much to it.
That's the immediate reaction I had. So why don't you give us like some of the big bullet points or like some of the things that, and you don't have to get too into it, but what are some of the things that you found remarkable that you think would translate well into a documentary or a mini series, something that stands out?
The fact that the whole World War II element, and this was written about in Time magazine, we have it on our website. The
Nice.
whole article about the discovery of this field by Ace Gutowski and how he's put an Oklahoman putting it to Hitler, directly.
Yeah.
So like that whole aspect is incredible to know that came from right here. I mean, that's why Edmond is such a wealthy area these days because so much money was poured into that. I mean, like 500
Absolutely.
million in a certain amount of time. Like we have articles all over the place explaining how much money was flowing out of that field and into the pockets of the landowners and everyone else.
Yep.
It was spreading out like crazy. Another aspect is going to be the Marie J part because there's this true crime part that we have a feeling that she might have killed Ace along with the other 5 husbands before her.
That's
And
what
the
I was
only way
getting
we're going to
at.
know, the only way we're going to know is to dig him up and test
Mhm.
him, I guess. But, that's
The Black Widow archetype, it fits really good. And, that it's got that element to this story. I was thinking that would be a good.
it's a really, yeah. And we've, we do presentations all over Oklahoma City. We've done Rotary clubs and different petroleum clubs, SIPES. We've done AAPG. We had a booth at their conference a couple of years back. I don't know if you were there for that one. You might have been.
Was that 2 years ago?
2 years ago, we had a
Yep.
booth at the AAPG conference. Yeah.
Yep. I was there for that one.
Yep. We've been trying to spread this story out to anyone who will hear it, but we're also, we're still looking for partners,
Okay.
financial partners to try and make this happen.
Okay.
So that's a big part of it. But also, I mean, the other part of the story is just the general, rags to riches tale. An immigrant came to Oklahoma and was able to make a good run all the way to the point where he had, an office on a high level at the First National Building and threw a party on the second floor, I guess like people did back then.
I guess.
So there's a lot going for it. And again, like there's so much we could expand on as it goes to, different wildcatters and different discoveries and the whole gritty era of the time.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and then you had in Oklahoma City, the Oklahoma City field, which actually produced more oil than the West Edmond Hunton lime unit, but it's an older, I want to say 20s vintage field. But you had the Mary Sudick well there. That was another famous blowout that blew out so big that, it reached all the way down to Norman and whatnot. And so there's,
Wow.
in this neck of the woods and in this same neighborhood, I got to tell you that Oklahoma City is in where it is for a reason. It's sitting on 2 of the biggest oil fields in the United States, straight up. You've got the Oklahoma City field, which is a beautiful structural, actually, this is public knowledge. I'm going to flash up what that structure looks like there. And then again, the West Edmond Hunt lime unit, straight up, that's why Oklahoma City is on the map. So. Oh, that's a great story. Well, so where are you guys at in terms of like, have you got to where you've actually started to put like scripts together or like outlines? Are you still in the kind of planning and data gathering process? And in that same vein, what kind of information did she have? Like, did she have just like a bunch of treasures of information and actual like artifacts, so to speak, documents, or was this kind of more word of mouth and that kind of stuff within their family?
So again, she didn't know about it until about 10 years ago. And she actually found out about it because the guy, they were inducting her father into the Oklahoma Sports Hall of Fame for football. He played
Right.
He played for the Detroit Lions before they were the Lions. Or sorry, take that back. Before the first Super Bowl, but he played in the first Super Bowl.
Okay.
As the Detroit Lions.
Okay.
But he was like, have you gotten to see that bronze of your grandfather at Mitch Park in Edmond? And she had no idea what he was talking about. So she went up there and then found this multi-million-dollar bronze they had erected, and it had a lot of information about the field and Ace. And that started her down this whole road, you know what I mean? She didn't have a lot family-wise. So a lot of it came from the Oklahoma History Center, just deep dives on the internet and whatever she could scrounge up from other relatives. So she, there's pictures on our website. She has a whole, like a heist wall kind of with all the information that he's had. Or that she's gathered on him and pictures and everything else, just trying to put the whole thing together.
Okay.
And that's, when I saw that, I was like, we need to make a website. Let's put this all in one place.
Okay.
a little more standardized for consumption.
Yeah, and so you've kind of archived and published what she had
Mm-hmm.
for the
Mm-hmm.
most part. Okay, great. Great.
Correct.
Beautiful. Beautiful.
And then there was another question you asked me before that. I didn't quite.
Oh, I know. I'm sorry. I tend
It's
to
okay.
ramble. I was asking you about whether or not you had, do you guys kind of have an outline?
Oh, right.
How far along in the process would you say in terms of a deliverable, showable script, I guess is the best way to put it?
So let's put it this way. We have all the pieces in place for whenever we receive funding, we can
Got
jump on it immediately.
Okay.
Everyone that we've talked to is ready to work, ready to put this thing together. We've talked to some landowners, specifically on the Wagner one. He wants us to interview him and he has uncles that have good stories about the field.
Okay, so that's still in the original family, that piece of it. See, the north part of Wailu is rural,
Yes.
and those are still big tracts of land. There's a lot of people, well-known people in the Oklahoma City community, wealthy people that live, on those lands out there.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but as soon as you cross the turnpike, and actually just north of the turnpike now, the whole field is starting to fill in. But
Right.
little side fun fact, and I'd mentioned this here, in the southern side of the unit, which was the last part to be developed, and then huge residential development has been there. In fact, my home was on a little finger lake kind of coming off of Lake Hefner, and we drilled 3 wells from Wiley Post Airport, and one of them went directly under my house in the
wow.
Briar Creek neighborhood subdivision. And so, and it was a serendipitous thing. We were planned a couple 100 feet to the west of there, but just a little fun fact about this rock. I was telling you, it's a filled-in cave system. Well, that sand that's in there, it's a carbonate sand, but it's kind of loose. It's not really as compacted as like some of the surrounding rock. And so when you're drilling it, the bit isn't able to really control itself. When you have hard rock, the bit can grab and do stuff. But when it's just mushy, we would lose, would have trouble controlling where the bit went. And anyway, so that being said, the plan had deviated a little bit off the plan, and we ended up going right under my house, like the corner of my kid's bedroom. So,
wow.
like I say, I'm really, feel a really special connection to this field, and I was just absolutely thrilled when you pulled that up. So this has been really enlightening. So why don't you take a second here to be a little bit specific about what it is you guys are asking, what you're wanting to do, your plan going forward with this project. Take a second to then plug your Landlocked GIS company, because that's one of the things I like giving people an opportunity here. This is kind of a small business channel also. Why don't you go ahead and go from there?
Sure. So the path forward is still a little hazy for us.
Sure.
Are still obviously looking for funding, but we're not asking a ton to make this happen. But we are looking for anyone who wants to partner with us, anyone who has skills that could help contribute to the project, anyone who has knowledge of the field, such as yourself. Anyone who wants to play game with us, we're welcome to have you. And once we get the documentary made, we want to hear from everyone how we want this to look, how we want it to be made. It's really oil forward. We're just going to try and make it to where it's as legit as possible, scientifically and otherwise. And then when the series potentially gets picked up, hopefully in the future, that's going to be another one where we're going to really try hard to keep it very on point with the oil industry and how things work. How things used to work.
Love it. Yes, and it is pro-oil. It's pro-America. It's kind of just pro all the stuff we like.
Right.
Have you thought about, I just was thinking while you're saying that, crowdfund campaign.
We have talked about it for sure, okay. But again, we don't know if we're big enough to handle that yet. But it could be an ongoing thing. It's a good idea. It's definitely
starting
something
on
I'll look
LinkedIn.
Into.
I'm not trying to get business, but of course I'm here. I'd love to be a resource, because I don't know. I definitely. I promise you, I know more about this, what's going on under this thing, than the people that have it right now, for sure.
Sure. Yeah.
But there's just just almost like a starting on LinkedIn to test the temperature of people kind of thing. That would be, I'd certainly listen, I'm on board to help if there's any way I can contribute.
That'd be fantastic. Thank you.
That's cool. Because I can kind of see something here. I really, like I say, people that know me, when I get into something, this field was just a huge life-changing thing. It was exciting. It just had everything geologic about it that's fascinating to somebody like me. It couldn't have been a more perfect place to work, man.
That's great.
I could see the rig from my house. I'd be driving to work. My flare would be burning just on the other side of the highway. There's nothing better than that feeling, man. I'm telling you right now. when the whole city is just watching your guys's, new well turn on. It's an amazing thing. Well, so why don't you
Absolutely.
talk a little bit about Landlocked GIS? We're going to provide all the links to your company website, to the Ace Gutowski site, and whatever else we need to. You had the nonprofit well plugging deal that we need to make sure we get up. But why don't you do a little plug for your company and then leave us with some words of wisdom?
Sure. So Landlocked GIS consists of myself. I have a couple contractors that come on now and then, but I handle all the work personally. And I exist primarily for the, smaller private equity type oil companies and land services companies that don't necessarily want to spend money hiring a full-time GIS person. The workload doesn't call for it, so why do
Right.
it?
Yeah.
That's why people like me exist.
Mhm.
We are hourly, we do contract based, and we've done everything GIS up to, top to bottom in the oil and gas field, but we also do environmental and, other different projects here and there for this Gutowski thing, for instance. I basically just, if a project comes across, I don't tend to say no.
Like that. Yeah, and I tend to enjoy working with people like you. There is kind of a difference between smaller operators that kind of want to do things on their own, keep things simple, and a lot of the time not pay for really expensive subscriptions if we can help it, because it really
Right.
matters to our bottom line. So, well, that's really good. Well, so why don't you give us a little words of wisdom, and I'm going to go ahead and get us going.
Okay, so with owning my own business, I own all of my successes and I own all of my failures. There's no one else to blame it on. And I have to tell myself, I'm not perfect. I'm not ever going to be perfect. And I mean, a good example of still screwing up after years of experience is biting yourself in the tongue. It's like, how many years have you been chewing, but you still bite yourself in the tongue? Don't let it get you down. Yeah, don't let it get you down. It's just a mistake. It'll heal. You'll get better.
Oh, that's awesome. Honestly, Phil, that's some of the best words of wisdom I've had in a while. That was a good one. I really appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Well, and to everybody out there that watches the show, who's working in the oil and gas business, thank you for tuning in. Make sure you go to my website, subscribe, visit Phil's website, learn about the West Edmond Hunton Lime Unit, the history of Oklahoma City oil and gas, check out his GIS services, and to all you GIS people out there, keep on mapping. We'll see you.
Right.
Thanks, Phil.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
You have to work for it. Don't be crazy. And work for your money.